Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Rachel Bloom, and I have the pleasure of working for the CSU Alumni Association. Thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon. We hope that the sun is shining brightly wherever you are and that your RAM pride remains strong. As a reminder, this is in a webinar format, so you're automatically muted with your camera off. So please use the chat and the Q&A features for any questions or comments. We'd love to communicate with you throughout the presentation today. To start things off, we'd love to see in the chat where you are joining from, and if you're an alumni, what year you may have graduated. Please be sure to select all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your message. But wherever you may be tuning in from, we are so glad that you're here. I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Alexandra, who is helping monitor the chat for us today. Thank you so much, Alexandra. Many of our attendees are CSU Alumni Association members. So if we want to move to the next slide, Angela, I've got a slide about that here. Thank you so much for your membership. It really does make events like this possible. And to learn more about membership and explore all that the Alumni Association has to offer, you can download our mobile app. So if you just take a little picture of that QR code, it will pull up that for you, which is really nice. And we can go ahead and move to the next slide. If you aren't a member yet, we hope you will consider joining during CSU Day of Giving on May 6th and 7th. So just next week already. During this 24-hour online giving event, CSU alumni, students, friends, faculty, and staff will come together to support student and alumni success, faculty research, and critical resources that will help encourage a brighter tomorrow. It's the perfect time to take your RAM pride to the next level with a gift to an area that's most meaningful to you. In just a moment, we'll also be adding to the chat a helpful article, my contact information if you're having any issues with technology throughout the presentation today. And then we'll include our awesome virtual calendar of events coming up. And we have lots of past event recordings available as well on our YouTube channel. So please consider subscribing to that. And then later on in the event, I'll be providing a survey link. If you could please take a moment to fill that out, we greatly appreciate your feedback. We'll also include the handout for today's webinar as well here shortly. So now you're not here for me, you're here to hear from our wonderful presenter, Angela Hayes. Angela, thank you so much for doing this for us today. Take it away.
I'm really glad that everybody's here. I'm thrilled to talk to you about this because this is such a perfect time. Actually, through this whole last year has been a perfect time to talk about resilience and grit. I want to tell you that there are two handouts. There's one that is an assessment that you can take so that you can get an idea of what your particular resilience level is in a variety of different areas. And then there's also a worksheet. And I'll be referring to that worksheet because, of course, we won't be going through the worksheet today during the webinar, but it'll allow you to get deeper into the concepts that we're going to be talking about today. So I want to start by saying that I presented on this topic a number of times, but given what we've all been through this last year, I changed it up a lot for this presentation because we need to go deeper to reclaim our resilience after what we've been through. Today, we'll be focusing on three main areas. We'll start with quick definitions of resilience and grit. Then we'll move to examining thought patterns that greatly affect our level of resilience, and finish by talking about how to change those thought patterns to increase your resilience and greatly increase your success and enjoyment of life in general. As I've mentioned, I've also got two documents for you. If you would like to have those in email form or some other form, you can contact me. My contact information will be at the end. And then any help that you want with working through any of those, you can always just contact me and we can work through them. I'll come back to that in a bit. I'd like to ask that you hold your questions about the presentation until the end so that we can all move through those questions and comments together. Now, if you have other kinds of things that you need to ask Rachel or Alexandra, they'll be the ones that'll be looking at the chat during the presentation, other than when I ask you questions and ask if you would mind putting some things in the chat to tell me your thoughts about it. All right. So As you see, resilience is the ability to deal with high levels of challenge while maintaining or regaining high levels of effectiveness and well-being. Grit is mental toughness. It's defined as a high level of perseverance and effort to overcome obstacles. Usually it's a combination of passion for a long-term goal and the motivation to achieve it. Gritty people keep going in spite of setbacks. I'm also changing up the presentation a bit in that I'm going to focus today on resilience instead of resilience and grit. We've all shown our grit. We've gotten through this last year. And everything that we talk about related to building resilience will also build your level of grit. So let's get started. Resilience isn't something that a person either has or they don't have. It's the result of a combination of actions that you take before, during, and after you face challenges. It can be developed by understanding and practicing new skills and dealing with adversity. Today, we'll be talking about specific skills and strategies that you can build to become even more resilient. If you've experienced adversity in the past, you're already ahead of the game because research shows that those who have faced difficulties in their lives show more effective responses to challenging events later on. One of the really exciting findings in the research on resilience is that facing challenges effectively actually rewires and restructures your brain to deal with adversity better in the future. It's not that we want to get that much practice in dealing with adversity, but know that each time you do, you're strengthening the pathways in your brain to deal effectively and bounce back more quickly in the future. Now, let's talk about how to effectively build those skills to increase your level of resilience. There is one very important aspect, and I can't stress enough how important this particular aspect is to resilience, but it's what most of us rarely, if ever, think about, and that is it's usually not the adversity or the event itself that causes us to be stressed or upset. It's our interpretation of the event. It's almost always the stories we tell ourselves about what happened, our unique interpretation. Beliefs matter because they shape the quality and intensity of your feelings and influence how you behave as a result, what you do in the moment. This is important because resilient people are able to regulate their emotions and control their reactions so that they respond in the best way in any given situation. The goal isn't to be in a great mood all the time. The goal is for our emotions and behaviors to be productive, appropriate responses to the facts of the situation, instead of knee-jerk reactions to whatever beliefs happen to be rolling through our heads at the time. An easy way to think of this is that A stands for adversity, the adversity you experience. And again, adversities are events that lead to reactions. They can be big, like losing a job, or small, like missing a minor deadline or being late to a meeting. Most of us think of adversity as leading directly to emotional and behavioral consequences. What we feel and do in response to the effect. It's like it goes from A to C, adversity to consequences. When something good happens, we experience positive emotions, and when something bad happens, we experience negative emotions. It seems logical, but it's just not accurate. It's not the event itself that causes emotions and behaviors. It's our thoughts and beliefs about what just happened that causes our emotions and behaviors. It's the story we tell ourselves about what just happened. So let's look at an example that's happened in countless households during the pandemic. In our boredom, many of us have tried out new dishes, cooking methods, and so on. Let's say that you've never made a souffle before, so you find a reasonably easy-looking recipe in a magazine and decide that you'll surprise your family with a fancy dish that evening at dinner. You follow the directions exactly, and it comes out completely flat. One person might think, of course it's flat. What was I thinking? I can barely pull off a decent grilled cheese sandwich. Why do I even try? I'm a terrible cook. So that's the B, the beliefs and the thoughts, and the consequences, they feel bad. Another might get angry at the editors of the magazine who obviously don't even try out the recipes that they print. Don't they realize what kind of stress people are under? And so they feel angry. So that's the C, the consequence, because of their particular beliefs. Another person might think, a fancy pancake, the kids will love it. We'll have a good laugh about this over dinner. So they might feel happy or just think it's funny. So each of those stories that are told will result in very different emotions, reactions, and actions. Now, when I work with people on this, most people will say, well, I can't control what I think. Yes, you can. And exerting this control will make an unbelievable amount of difference in your level of resilience. People can have vastly different responses to the same incident. In fact, some wouldn't see it as an incident at all, or might not even notice it. So let's think of another quick example. Two different people getting cut off in traffic. So one might honk their horn, race after the driver who just cut them off, yell at them, and then realize that the person can't hear them. So they use a gesture that makes their point loud and clear. They might be angry about it for hours afterwards and recount the story to other people and just realize that that person is responsible for ruining their day. So in the chat box, tell me, is that person who cut them off responsible for ruining their day? What do you think? No. Okay, Chris says absolutely. All right. Okay, so we've got more no's than we've got the absolutely, but absolutely, that's a pretty strong word. So maybe that balanced out a bit. Let's say another person might get cut off in traffic and barely think about it, unless it almost causes an accident, in which case their fight or flight response will kick in, and then they see that the accident didn't happen. They drive on, they let it go, and they don't think about it again. Let's look at it from yet another lens. Let's say that you were cut off in traffic and for some reason you knew that the woman who cut you off is trying to get to the hospital as soon as she can because her toddler is in the back seat choking on something and he's turning blue. She's about a mile from the hospital. She's just praying that she can get there in time. So if you know that that's the reason that she cut you off, are you less likely to have a reaction to it? Are you less likely to think anything other than hopeful thoughts for that toddler? It matters the story we tell ourselves. So if that's the case, if it's the case that if we know that this is the reason she cut us off and is driving erratically and nothing happens to our body, we don't go into fight or flight, we don't have any kind of negative thoughts, then we can also do that for ourselves. So if you would normally get angry about getting cut off, you could think, you could decide that the person probably has a good reason for driving erratically, or that they're just a bad driver and you hope that they get to wherever they're going safely. Or maybe they'll invest in some driving lessons, which would be great. And then you let it go. Letting things like that go greatly increases resilience. So it's important to look at that B-C connection. And this is in your worksheet. You'll be able to do this in more depth later on. So with that, you'll think of like a recent adversity that you don't think you handled well, let's say. Describe in your head, or you'll jot down what happened as objectively as possible, as if it were being captured by a video camera. Then think about how you reacted to the event, your emotions about the event and your behaviors. Then really tune into that B. What beliefs or thoughts did you have that led to your feelings and actions? That's C. Try hard to think of what your thoughts were actually, rather than the sanitized version. A lot of times when people do this exercise, they go with a sanitized version, like, oh, I felt slightly miffed when Penelope kept bringing everyone's attention back to her during my birthday party. No, exactly what you really thought. That's the best way to be able to pinpoint that B to C connection. What were the thoughts that you had that led to the feelings and behaviors that happened as a result? Now, of course, there are situations where our thoughts and beliefs don't really matter because the events are so severe that our reactions are driven by the event itself, like the loss of a loved one or other tragedies. In these cases, the emotions and actions are from the tragedy itself, not our interpretation of it. But later on, how quickly you do or don't bounce back to the extent that you can will be dependent upon the stories that you keep telling yourselves about the tragedy. I really enjoyed this one, the amygdala hijack. This is another situation where the ABCs don't matter. The amygdala is the part of the brain that processes pure emotion. So consider this story. Jenny and Jake had been dating for 2 years. On Jenny's recent birthday, Jake proposed, and they planned an elaborate wedding for the summer. 3 months before the wedding, Jenny found out that Jake slept with a woman from his office, and she broke off the engagement over text. She wouldn't answer her phone, didn't return his text, and didn't open the door when he came by. So it's about 3 weeks later now, and one night her friends convinced her to meet them for a drink after work. As she scans the room, she sees Jake at a table with his back to her, sitting with an attractive woman. It's only been 3 weeks, and he's sitting there with an attractive woman in this bar. Jenny, with her drink in her hand, storms across the room, calls Jake's name, and throws her drink in his face as he turns in surprise. That's an amygdala hijack. Again, the amygdala is the part of the brain that purely processes emotion and signals the body to send out adrenaline, cortisol, and other fight or flight chemicals. There's no time or space for information to go through the normal channels in the various part of Jenny's brain. It just passes through all that and goes straight to the body and sounds the alarm. Now, this can be a really good thing in life or death situations, because in those situations, we just need to act. We don't need to think through it. We don't need to think, okay, let's break up into dyads and let's discuss the best way to, we just need to act. But in many situations, it's really best if the brain has time to catch up and process. So when it's not a life or death situation, like in Jenny's case, if she had spent more time or had more time, she might have otherwise noticed that the man she saw and threw the drink at only resembled Jake and not really even that much. It might be helpful to keep in mind that there actually is time with an amygdala hijack. It just doesn't feel like it. There are actually 8 seconds elapsed time between the time a person's hot button is pushed and the amygdala starts sending out all these signals and the body gets flooded with cortisol and adrenaline and all of that. So if you think about that, that's a lot of time. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. It doesn't seem like it in the moment. It seems instantaneous, just like that, but there really are 8 seconds. And so it's helpful for you to remember that. Who knows, it might keep you from throwing a drink in a stranger's face one day. Now let's get more specific about how our thoughts affect our level of resilience. There are a number of thinking traps that affect resilience. Jumping to conclusions is the first one that we'll talk about. Let's say you've been 6 months in a new job. You get along well with your manager and she's been straightforward with you about her praise of what you're doing well and what areas she'd like to see improvement. You get in one morning to a one-line email from your manager. Call me as soon as you get in. Okay, you can't tell tone in an email, so you might hear it, call me as soon as you get in, or call me as soon as you get in. However it is that you perceive it, in the chat box, tell me, what are some of the examples of the first things that might go through your head? And I know you were kidding, Chris. Yeah, uh-oh, bad news. What did I do? I'm in trouble. What did I do wrong? Yeah, exactly. So she wants you to call her as soon as you get in. What do you likely do instead? What would you start thinking about or checking or rechecking? Replay my work. Yeah. Yeah. Look for a new job. Okay. We're getting extreme. Think about what I did the previous day, stress, check past emails. Some people might get angry. They might think, I didn't do anything. Why is she coming down on me? And all she said was, call me as soon as you get in. Grab a pen and paper, call the boss for details. There we go. Yeah. That's what the most resilient thing to do would be, but we often don't. We come up with all these, again, those B's, those beliefs, those thoughts that then lead us to either being afraid or angry or thinking we're going to need a job search. We'll get into some of the spinning out that we can do. But we can think of this as kind of an umbrella error because thinking traps always involve making an assumption. So yeah, we start going over everything we might have done wrong, checking and rechecking our work, all kinds of things, instead of doing what she asked, which is call me as soon as you get in. So just for your own reference, think about whether you have a tendency to jump to conclusions. Are there certain situations or people with whom you're the most likely to jump to conclusions? Again, you can work through this on your worksheet. When possible, avoid jumping to conclusions and instead see your conclusions as theories that need to be tested by gathering the facts. You can take the past into account, of course. If the only emails you have ever gotten from your supervisor that say, call me as soon as you get in, have been so that she can yell at you about something you did wrong, then the jumping to conclusions, that might be reasonable in a situation like that. But it's only a thinking trap if there's just no evidence to support the assumption that you're making. The next one is tunnel vision. So these are the three most common. The next one is tunnel vision. So as you think about this one, remember that as humans, our brains can only process just so much data. So we take a lot of shortcuts. We think we take in everything, but we really only take in a very small amount of what's going on. And what we take in can have everything to do with our current state of mind or the way we just typically see the world. So with that in mind, imagine that you're standing at the front of your company's main conference room giving an important presentation. In this case, 3 of your colleagues make eye contact with you throughout the presentation. Your director makes a few encouraging statements, but also yawns 3 times. 2 of your colleagues talk quietly throughout the entire presentation and never once look up at you. And 1 looks at her phone halfway through, gets up, leaves, never comes back. So because you've selectively noticed these things that I mentioned, you didn't notice the nods of agreement, the sustained eye contact, the way people are leaning forward with interest and asking informed questions. Now, if in your mind you're just seeing those small things that make you think it's not going well, you might begin to think about all the terrible things that will happen as a result. You'll get passed over for that next promotion. Your colleagues have lost all respect for you, and on and on. You decide you want to get this pain over as quickly as possible because it just keeps getting worse. So you wrap up before you finish presenting all the information. You make an excuse about needing to get to another meeting, and you grab everything and you dart out the door without waiting for questions or comments. And then your director and colleagues are looking at each other confused, and now they're questioning to themselves their early assessment that your presentation was really great. So our thinking traps often bring on the very things that we are trying to avoid. And then one of my favorites, it might be my favorite, it's my favorite thinking trap, mind reading. All of us mind read. We assume that we know what the other person is thinking and we react accordingly. The problem is we are almost never right. No matter how well you know the person, you are almost never right. Our tunnel vision keeps us from picking up cues that don't agree with what we know to be true because we know what that person is thinking. So something similar to this happened to me. Let's say that you've seen an acquaintance friend, Jane, at a number of networking events, back when we could do networking events, over the last several months. The two of you hit it off right away and you've had coffee several times. She's been very complimentary of your work and has said she's talking to her boss about having you do some consulting for her company. And working for her company doing consulting has always been a dream of yours. So you're nervous, but really excited. She asked you to send a proposal to her that she can share with her boss. You sent it to her last week and she was going to present it Monday of this week. It's now Friday of this week and you haven't heard anything from her. You wanted to call, but you didn't want to seem desperate, so you haven't called her to check about how the meeting went. You're currently at a networking event. You see her across the room, smile, wave, and you start to move toward her. She scowls at you. She turns her back to you, and she leans in to talk to the person next to her, glancing in your direction, and she's got her hand up like this, talking to the person next to her. Okay, in the chat box, what are some things that are going through your mind? Why? Something must have happened. Yeah. What else? What else might come up? Are they talking about me? What are they saying? There's something going on that I don't know. Yes, these would be good, mostly. Maybe her boss liked the presentation more than expected and she's upset about it. There we go. So we could look at it potentially positively. Was I too naive? Did I think her boss was going to like it and he thought it was garbage? Yeah. There's so many different things. And what it actually turned out, well, let's ask this first. Okay. If you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. I should have spent more time on that proposal. It's probably just not good at all. She doesn't even want to talk to me now. Her boss probably yelled at her about even bringing it to him. Okay, so if you do go over and talk to her, how are you likely to be presenting yourself? What is she likely to see from you? Will you be acting the same as you normally have with her? Yeah, maybe aggravation. Yeah. Maybe, yeah, you might feel kind of defensive and you might be showing that. That would be good, nice, kind, and ask how it went. That would be great. That's often not what we do, but the resilient person would do that. Would be nice, kind, and ask how it went. Hey, it's great to see you. I didn't get a chance to talk to you this week. So what happened with the proposal? And it turns out what happened with the proposal is her boss got called out of town. And so he wasn't able to hear the presentation until late yesterday. So Thursday, late afternoon. She's had back-to-back meetings all day and wasn't able to call you, but she was hoping to see you here because she wanted to tell you that the boss wanted to double the contract so that you could do the same work at another one of the office's locations. Yeah, so it's always better to gather. So why was she scowling? I'll tell you why. Again, hypothetical situation, but I may have been in something similar to this. She was scowling because she had forgotten her glasses and she couldn't see me or her across the room. And if I take my glasses off, I promise if someone waves and smiles at me, I won't be able to see them. So she's scowling about that, and she's feeling embarrassed about the fact that she can't see without her glasses. And she had leaned over to ask the person next to her if they happen to have reading glasses, because she needs glasses both for distance and for reading. And she was planning to go over some things with you when she talks to you. Yeah. Okay, so we have all these self-fulfilling prophecies that we don't know they're happening because we assume we know what someone's thinking. Because what if I would have marched across there and said, fine, treat me like this, and stormed off? A lot of those kinds of things happen, and we never check. And so we just assume, and these things shape our lives, and we're not aware that it's even happening. So avoid mind reading and tunnel vision and jumping to conclusions as much as you possibly can. Now we're going to go a little deeper. Okay, if you want to use the show hands button, how many of you have experienced situations where your reactions to something seemed maybe too intense, like maybe something relatively minor happened and you feel white hot anger or deeply sad or some other emotion that seems out of proportion to what just happened? Yeah. Yeah, it happens to all of us at one time or another. And the reason is that sometimes our surface thoughts and beliefs, like the ABCs that we talked about that you'll be able to work on the worksheet, they don't explain our reactions. Not really. Not if it's something extreme to something that wasn't that big of a deal. So sometimes it goes deeper than that ABC activity that we talked about. Nearly always it's because whatever happened is connected to a deeply held underlying belief that you may not even know that you have. Usually it's about how the world should operate and how others should operate within it. So the beliefs that we talked about before are surface beliefs, and we may not notice them until we tune in and practice hearing the things we're saying to ourselves. It's very important to do that, to do the ABCs and to get good at that. But iceberg beliefs are much harder to find. They're usually rules that apply in many different circumstances, rules that we have inside us. So once you've identified and challenged them, you'll be able to be more resilient in many areas of your life. So detecting icebergs is a way to bring those underlying beliefs to the surface and decide whether or not they still work for you. They generally fall under one of three categories: achievement, acceptance, and control. So achievement, an example, let me give you a few examples of achievement. Iceberg beliefs could be: being successful is what matters most. Failure is a sign of weakness. No matter what, I must never give up. There is nothing worse than failure. Acceptance, it could be: what matters most in life is being loved. It's my job to please people and make them happy. I want people to always think the best of me. Control might be: only weak people can't solve their own problems. Asking for help shows you're not in charge. If you're not in control, you're a weakling. So it's helpful to start thinking, what might be your theme? Are you achievement oriented, acceptance oriented, or control oriented? You don't have to be just one. Another way you can think of it is, when you have problems in a relationship, does it seem to have to do with achievement, acceptance, or control? Iceberg beliefs can hurt you in two ways. They can become activated at unexpected times, which leads to out of proportion emotions and reactions. And conflicting iceberg beliefs can make it hard to make decisions. So for example, one woman that I worked with had come from a family of very high achieving women. And so one of her iceberg beliefs was women should always achieve at their highest potential. But she also, in her family, her mom and her grandmother, they weren't around a lot. So she also has an iceberg belief: the kids should always come first. My kids should always come first. So when offered a big promotion, she had a really hard time deciding, and she had some really extreme emotions, even thinking about it. But without knowing what those iceberg beliefs were, or once she did know what they were, it made it much easier to make that decision. And one of you mentioned this on the chat, and it's true. There's two things that happen in many circumstances, but especially iceberg beliefs: assimilation and confirmation bias. So assimilation means that you're likely to see everything through the lens of that iceberg belief, especially once it's been set off by a related situation. And the other thing that keeps us stuck in iceberg beliefs is confirmation bias. This is something that all of us do in general, but especially if we're caught in an iceberg belief. With confirmation bias, we scan the environment for evidence that confirms our beliefs, and we overlook things that prove our beliefs are wrong. You can think of it as the Velcro versus Teflon effect. We're Velcro for evidence that supports our beliefs, and Teflon for things that contradict it. It just slides right off. It's important to detect your iceberg beliefs so you can evaluate and, if necessary, change them. And gaining this insight is great for building your resilient skills. Again, on the worksheet, you can see how to do this, but if any of you need more help with this, feel free to contact me, because this one is the most difficult one to get to. And there's a variety of different exercises that we could also try to get to what those iceberg beliefs are. Okay. So we've talked about the kind of the insight part. Now let's talk about more specifically what to do about it. So now you know what type of thinking styles you have. You've learned how you view the world. Maybe, and again, going through the research, you'll be less at the mercy of your emotions, respond better when adversity strikes. The next thing is to identify your explanatory style. This is not in your worksheet. It's a pretty straightforward concept. But again, if any of you want to talk about it further, feel free to contact me. Learning your style helps you determine why you think things happen, how often you think they happen, and whether or not you think they happen in every situation. So that'll make more sense as we talk through each of them. Each of them are me versus not me, always versus not always, and everything versus not everything. So me versus not me. Do you usually see problems as being caused by you or by other people and or circumstances? So example, you leave a voicemail message for your close friend and she doesn't get back to you. A me belief would be, I haven't been a good friend lately and she's mad at me. A not me belief could be, she's so self-centered lately. Or it could be benign, like, I'm sure she's just really busy and she'll get back to me when she can. And always versus not always would be, when you identify causes, is it usually that you see something as temporary or around for a long time? So let's say you do a sales pitch to an important client. The client thanks you for your time, but states that they are not interested in buying. If you have an always explanatory style, you might think, I don't have what it takes to connect to potential clients in face-to-face meetings. I don't think sales was a good career choice for me. A not always style might be, my pitch was off today. I'll get more sleep for the next pitch. Or even, I can see that the client liked my pitch, but the product just doesn't meet their needs right now. I'll circle back in 6 months. And then everything versus not everything. This one has to do with whether you feel like the cause of the problem will affect many areas of your life or just a few. A manager whose team failed to deliver on time might say, I'm just horribly irresponsible, and think it applies to all areas of her life. Another everything style reaction might be, I've never been good at this type of project work. I'm just incapable of learning it. Actually, what am I good at learning? maybe nothing. A not everything style response might be, I learned a lot from this experience this time. I'll definitely shine the next time. Or even, this is the first time my team hasn't been on time with a project in over a year. This isn't likely to happen again. It's important to determine your style of explaining events to yourself so that you can begin to see a fuller range of the causes of problems, and thereby making you a better problem solver and making you more resilient. Now, is there a right style to have when explaining problems that crop up? The best way is to be flexible given the situation and your ability to look at it as accurately as possible. However, in general, research has found that those with a me, always, everything style tend to be pessimistic, and that interferes with their problem-solving ability, their resilience, and their overall happiness. Those with a not me, not always, not everything style tend to be optimistic, more resilient, and better able to solve problems. So, putting it all in perspective, there are two extreme examples of what happens when a person faces an adversity and begins to think through long-term consequences, the implications of the adversity. To determine how to best put something into perspective, it helps to write down what causes you the most worry and start with that to practice this process that you have on your worksheet. So we'll just talk about it briefly. I'll give you a quick example that happens for a lot of people. They start with a relatively minor adversity and project all sorts of things that they know will happen if they can't get it stopped. So a woman might be worried about the argument she's been having with her teenage son about taking out the trash. And she thinks, with all these arguments, he'll probably pull away and spend even more time with his deadbeat friends. They probably take drugs. They've probably already gotten him into drugs. What if he gets busted? What if he ends up in and out of rehab and can't hold down a job? And what if that, we can forget about college. I mean, that's not going to happen. He probably won't be able to even hold down a job at a fast food restaurant with all the trouble he'll be in. And he'll end up blaming me for all of it. You know he will. He'll cut me out of his life completely. Okay, so you can see how those kinds of things can happen. And the reason it can happen is to go from one to the next. So she has arguments with him about taking out the trash. He's probably going to spend more time with his friends. That's pretty logical. He probably is going to spend more time with his friends. It's the spinning out after that. So on your worksheet, you'll be able to look at those kinds of things that you think, how likely they are to happen, what a good case scenario would be, and so on. And then one of the pieces of that exercise is to think of solutions and ways to keep from spinning out like that in the future. On the other side of that, there are people who are overly optimistic. And no matter what happens, they think, it's probably going to be fine, no matter what. And you can use, if you're one of those people that's overly optimistic and you just don't even really think about the negative things that could happen, because if you do think through those, then you can start solving those problems. You can use the same form, that same exercise, just in reverse. Okay, so on your worksheet, I also gave you some calming and focusing techniques. You'll find controlled breathing, regressive muscle relaxation, positive imagery. You can also deal with intrusive thoughts by completely changing up what you're doing. So intrusive or obsessive thoughts, the best thing to do is like maybe play a mind game, pick categories or a category and name everything you can think of in that category in alphabetical order. So it puts your mind somewhere else. Call a friend, but don't obsessively go over the thoughts in your head over and over again so she can help you sort it out. Not saying I've ever done that, but that might be something that, that happens to people. So best way is to just disengage from whatever the intrusive obsessive thoughts are, get on something else for a while. And when you come back, you'll be better able to put real-time resistance into effect. And so this is the last one. Once you've calmed down through any of these means, you can think things like, a more accurate way of seeing this is blank. That's not true because blank. A more likely outcome is this, and I can this to deal with it. So you've now learned 7 skills that will improve your ability to rise to life's challenges and deal with life's daily hassles. The more you practice these skills, the more you'll find that you're better prepared and recover more quickly when adversity strikes. You'll have more inner strength to create the life you want for yourself. So, well, let me also give you here's my contact information. Feel free to, email is best. Feel free to contact me to go over any of the things that we've talked about, work through anything on the worksheet, or anything else that has to do with your career. I would be delighted to work with you. What kinds of questions? Are there questions, comments? You're also free to send those to me through email as well. Does anyone have questions or comments? Oh, yes, thank you. Yes, great, thanks. Now this will be recorded and it'll be on our Alumni Association careers page if you want to go back over any of the information. You'll also get the slides later on. How you can access the worksheet. Rachel.
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
put that in the chat again, and we'll also include that in the post-event email for you. Thank you
Okay.
for asking. We want to definitely make sure you have those.
Yeah. And yes, I would love to talk more about obsessive thoughts and worry. I see that we're about at time. If you'd like to contact me directly, we could go over that in more depth. I know that I got carried away and I talked longer than I intended to. Oh, yeah. Advice for making sure to keep this information in mind in stressful situations. First of all, the more you practice, the more likely you are to remember. Also, what I did in the beginning is I would like wear something that I normally wouldn't, like on my wrist or something like that, something that would remind me. I also put sticky notes up in various places to remind me to use these kinds of exercises or use the calming or focusing or whatever I needed to do. I really think that when you go through the worksheet, I think that you'll find that certain things will resonate with you more than other things will, and that will also help you. Like you can put something on a sheet or have it, program it so it comes up on your watch or on your computer or on your phone every so often to just remind you to think about those kinds of things. Because we get busy and one thing leads to another, and pretty soon we're spinning out about something that, and we don't need to. We don't need to do that to ourselves. So, but again, contact me if you want to talk more about it, and we can talk more about strategies. I'd need to know more about like what has worked for you in the past and those kinds of things. Okay, any other thoughts, questions? All right, well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed talking to you. And I look forward to hopefully talking to some of you in the future if you contact me. Bye. Great, thank you.